Wouldn't it be nice if the template that we got with Blazor actually gave real weather? Well, now it can. The template model shows how to bring in some dummy data, just randomly generated. I'm going to show you how we can bring in some real data from real weather service. So the data I'm going to be bringing in will include a description of the weather, the temperature in Fahrenheit already, wind speed, and actually an icon that goes with what the forecast looks like. So my forecast is going to take as an input an address, and then when I click Get Forecast, bring up the forecast that goes to that address. And since I am new to Blazor, I'm going to make this as simple as possible. I'm going to work with a real forecast model, which is this, so the layout for the data elements I'm going to bring in, a real forecast service, and a real weather fetch data file. And rather than watch me type, we're going to look at this on a PDF. So for my weather forecast, I'm going to work with two different data sources, the geocoding service from census.gov, which is free, which will give me the latitude and longitude for any address, and then the National Weather Service, which will give me the weather for that location. I'm also going to be working with an extension in Chrome to allow me to look at the JSON information that I'm getting from these locations, from these APIs, so that I can now take them and work with them in Blazor. So the process to do this, I've uploaded in a PDF, so that's what we're looking at here in order to make all of this work, but I'm going to just walk you through it so you can see what was involved in doing it. First, I'm going to have an edit form, which is going to let me put in the address, and then the display area is going to show the 5-day forecast. The form is going to link to the process that's going to kick off the forecast using the address that I've entered as a parameter. And then the service is going to get the GPS coordinates, get the National Weather Service forecast, office, and grid, which I'm going to need, and then get the corresponding forecast and send all of that data back to the user. So my two models are my address model to be able to capture the user entered address and the weather real forecast. So just a few basic pieces to make this all work. Now, when I go out to get the latitude and longitude for an address, I'm using the census, the geocoding census API, which is this. And if you enter that into a Chrome browser with the JSON extension, you'll see results that look like this. So for example, this is my X coordinate is my longitude, and my Y coordinate is my latitude for the given address. At the bottom down here, at the bottom in this lower area of the browser, you'll see for when I've highlighted the X value, it tells me that the address of that number in my JSON file is result.address matches, and then square brackets 0, and then dot coordinates dot x, and this is dot coordinates dot y. So that's how I'm going to access those two pieces of data in order to pick up the latitude and longitude and then send that to the National Weather Service. Once I get latitude and longitude, I submit that through a different API to the Weather Service, which comes back to me with the office, the affiliated office with that location, and the grid location, grid X and grid Y, that corresponds to that. And those are parameters I can feed into a URL, or they've already plugged those in for me. So one of the other items that comes back is forecast, and in this case it's forecast with the whole API ready to go, with the office and then the grid X and the grid Y already filled in. So I'll be taking that and sending that to then get my forecast. So now once I have that URL ready to go, I submit it for the forecast, and this is the information that will come back for the particular time frame that I'm currently working in. So there's the model that I put together to make that work, and this is my page. So it's fetch data with a 2 out of extreme creativity, and here I'm going to be using Blazor demo.ui.data in order to access the weather model that has all those items I need. I'm going to be injecting my real forecast service. And one of the things I've added here is the model, is the edit form to be able to pick up an address and be able to send that address to get the process started. I'm also being careful with my display. I don't want to show an empty forecast. So if there's no forecast, don't show anything. Once I have a forecast, I want it to populate my table, and the @forecast.icon, name, temperature, these are the links between the data that's in the C code down below and the display on the screen. In the same file, a little bit lower down, you'll see the code, which is here. I'm referring to my real forecast model, but I'm going to call it here forecasts. I'm creating a little model right in the page that's called my lookup address model, and it's just got one element in it, my lookup address, which is a string. And within this page, I'm going to be referring to that model as new address, and it's going to be a new instance of my lookup address model. That way I can link it to the edit form up above. And then I'm going to run a task to execute get forecast. So the forecast will come up. I will wait for my forecast service, execute lookup forecast to bring me the forecast that I need. And I commented out the original code that came with fetch data, just to keep it there in case I needed it. So this has some description of all of those changes. And then this is the service. So the service is the service that's actually going out and getting real data from the real world. The three usings that I've needed are systemnet HTTP and HTTP headers, and also Newtonsoft JSON.link in order to process the JSON information that these systems are sending back. So within my real forecast service, I'm creating 3 HTTP clients. I could have probably done this with 2, but I was just making it all kind of copy and paste and making each section work. I'm creating my longitude and latitude as strings so that I can pass them from one section to the next. And I'm calling it sections just in terms of logical sections. It's not a programming section. And then here's the actual task. It's going to be returning back to my page weather real forecast array, and I've called it execute lookup forecast, and it's taking as a parameter string of my location. So I'm taking that location and I am formatting it so that I can plug this into the API in the right format for getting the latitude and longitude. I can't plug it in as it is. Any spaces in that I need to replace with plus signs in order to make it work. And then my entire URL code is this, with the 0 and curly braces representing the parameter that's going to be filled in by my address. So then I'm going to try going out and running this API to get the data. So I'm putting together that URL geocode, which is this, and my address, which has already been cleaned up, and I'm sending that off to client geocode, which is the HTTP client that's going to run this API. And that response is going to come back to response geocode. And then I'm going to wait for response geocode to be read in as a string so that I can now take that information in one big log string and use jobject.parse to parse out and pull out just the data that I need out of that output. So data geocode will be every element that's been parsed out. And now I'm going to pick up my longitude and my latitude by going to data geocode.result.address matches, square bracket 0, dot coordinates x, and dot coordinates y. If that doesn't work, so if there's an error, I'm going to catch it and I'm going to send back. I'm actually just making it easy and sending back to my array of weather real forecast a line that says location not found, try entering street address and zip code. I'm sending just that one line to the array so that my forecasts test will not be null and that information will display on the screen. And then now I have my latitude and longitude. So I'm going to send those off to apiweather.gov to find out my forecast URL. So it's going to do the same thing. It's going to process my URL with my latitude and longitude, so 0 and 1. And I have a few console write lines that help me with some debugging. The API Weather Gov right now requires a user agent header, spelled like that, but it doesn't really matter what you type in for a text string. So exactly like this will work. They do say that ultimately they're going to be requiring an API key. That information is being sent out to HTTP client called client get grid. So that's processing that HTTP call. And the response will come back to response grid. I'm going to take response grid, split out the content, get the content as a string, and send the results of that string to my result grid. Again, some console write lines for some debugging. And now I'm going to parse the grid information and call it data grid. And all I need to get from there is that forecast line, which has the whole URL ready to go. So this is a little bit repetitive. Now my client forecast HTTP client is going to could have the same, as it does here, has the same header. And now I'm going to run my forecast URL through get async, get my response, take the response, read it into a string, into my result, and then parse that out and then put the parsed information into the array called data. Now I'm going to send back up to 10 records the information that's in data. And the information I'm pulling out is from data. I'm looking at properties, periods, and then index, so 0 through 10. And then the name, temperature, wind speed, detailed forecast, icon, and is daytime. You'll notice these are all lowercase, so this is exactly as it's referenced on the JSON file. The elements in my model are all uppercase, and they need to be uppercase in the model. All of that information is going to come into the array. If I have an error with this and it doesn't work, it's going to catch it, and it's going to send back forecast not available, try looking out your window. And that's it. Not quite it. It's almost it. So this explains all of those steps. The last piece to make it work would be to go into Startup CS to add the real forecast service into services. So services add singleton, putting in my weather real forecast service, and that's going to make it work. So this PDF is up on my GitHub page, Blazor Weather. The individual files aren't there, but there are only 3, and they can be copied and pasted right out of the PDF. Good luck.